well. Felicia and I wanted to say hello.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hello, hello, hello. And we missed you last week. I failed to make any sort of announcement. We just didn't show up. So we figured like once a year, we just don't show up. And I think last year it was also the same day. I think it was on Memorial Day. So if that's one thing you can remember is on Memorial Day, remember that we may not show up. If it's a Monday, well, it's always a Monday, right?
Yeah. Actually, we were on. It came up in my memories. I remember you said that, and I was like, "Oh, here it is."
Well, maybe it was.
Okay.
Okay.
I don't know when it was that happened last year.
Hey guys, yeah, it was one other day last year. Anyway, we're here today, and we wanted to say, hey guys, and just check back in and talk about something that's been really exciting. I know. Good evening, guys. I know that I made a post on my page, and it was like super engaged, like high engagement. People really, really liked the picture of this book that I held up. And all I did was I held up this book, and it's called Cured. And I guess everybody likes that word, right? Mm-hmm. Who doesn't want to know? Who doesn't want to have that? Mm-hmm. And I did this post on May 23rd, so like 10 going on 2 weeks ago, and there were hundreds of comments of people that were interested, because I said, who would be interested if I kind of broke down this book and did a workshop on it? And like hundreds of people were interested. So I was like, whoa, that's pretty interesting. I have always been fascinated by it. Have you been fascinated by it, or is it just kind of like, what's your take on the whole people that have these experiences where there's not a real good explanation and they just get better? Does that intrigue you, or are you just like, well, something happened, obviously?
I guess I hadn't. When you hear about individual situations like that, it is pretty amazing. But when you told me, I think you told me when you first got the book, or you told me about it or something. What I think is interesting is that he actually studied a lot of those cases. That's what's interesting, because then he could really gather, and he did it in a scientific way. It's not a bunch of woo-woo stuff. So that's what I think was interesting. But before then, it's just like, cool. You want anybody to be cured, and so yeah, the fact that he studied all of it is cool to me.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's kind of sad that people need to have a so the very people that are kind of like, this is only possible if we say it's possible, are the doctors. And it takes a doctor to write a book for people to respect that it's possible. So it's just kind of like it went the whole gamut, like, full circle from, we only believe this if certain people say it's possible, to, oh, okay, so he says, and he did the research, so okay. But I'll tell you what first got me interested in it was my mom. I remember I was at her house, and she was watching a PBS special, and on she loved PBS. And the special was this doctor, and her name was Lisa Rankin. And she's also an MD, and her special on PBS was called Mind Over Medicine. And he was another physician who had seen just crazy stuff, started studying stuff like one woman, I remember, she had just horrible, intractable vomiting. She couldn't stop throwing up. And so basically, I can't remember if it was an accident or they were experimenting with her, which was really mean if they were, but they gave her a medicine to make her vomit. And she stopped vomiting. She thought that they gave her something to make her stop, and they gave her something, and she stopped. All the way to people, thinking they had radiation, got saline, but they thought they were getting radiation. 30% of the people's hair fell out because they thought they were getting radiation. Yeah. And then there was one person who had a split personality. So they had schizophrenia, and when they were in one mindset, they had diabetes. Their blood sugars were high. When they switched over to the other person, they did. I'm like, and it was documented, the sugars were there. So it's just like, that's the power of the mind. Like this identity, the identity of the person with diabetes, that brain would create the chemistry for high blood sugar. I mean, that's just crazy. So she just went in all into like, okay, the mind is that powerful. This is, we need to be studying this. And so she kind of, that was years ago. So then he's kind of, Jeffrey is kind of the next generation, kind of the same thing.
Where do they work together at all?
She notes him. I was just looking at, she has a blog where she said something about him, and she's kind of like going over his book herself. Yeah, they know each other.
Okay.
I don't know if they work together. But he's probably a little bit more, even more rigorous than her, because he was like, as much as he wanted to believe some of these cases of people who they got better or went to like faith healers and believed they were better, he was like, but your blood work's not matching up.
Better.
You're not better. And he was like, as much as they believe they're better, they're not. So it's not only that. It's not only believing.
Yep, that's what I thought about. I haven't read it yet, but just looking at it and looking at the reviews, that's what I think was, it's a number of things. And the things that we like to talk about, some of those. And so, you know, and still no guarantee, as we know.
No.
But the lovely part about it is you still, things are better for you. Still.
Yes. Either way. Yeah. And he talks about pillars, you know, like the pillars of the things that we need to address. But yeah, I know there's a story in there too of a woman who got, I think I mentioned this already, got better, like stage 4 pancreatic, like something that was just, you know, there's not coming back. And she was just fine as wine, came back. I think she was in Brazil, came back, and then she came back into that same environment. And I think she was a nurse, into like the stressful environment. And about a year later, it came back, and she did die. So it's just really, it's very interesting. Very, very interesting about.
And it also, like, the fact that you're talking about that it's a number of things, because you have people that have, you know, that very strong mindset, positivity, and all of that. And like, against like, this is not going to get me, this is not going to take me down, which is what someone wants. But if they don't have a lot of the other things in place, you know, they're not doing anything else. They're not supporting their immune system. They're just gonna, you know, like headbutt their way through. Not so much.
Yeah, I know. One of the biggest things he talks about too in the book is the immune system, the whole concept of the immune system, which is another thing that really struck me, because I always had this feeling when I was working in neurology, and we focused on MS, and it was chemo and radiation, or chemo and steroids, and that's the treatment. And the whole concept is suppress the immune system. And my training, that's consistent. Like, that's what you're trained. That's how you learn. You have this autoimmune, it's attacking the body. You have to suppress it. But like, something in me is like, that doesn't seem right. It just doesn't seem like that is going to work long term for this person. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
If anybody's listening, let me know if that resonates with you too, about the immune system, because that's a big part of this book and a big part of the workshop. Is back in the day, like years and years ago, there were doctors who saw that when there were patients that had cancer,
Mhm.
and they, for whatever reason, got sick and ran a really high fever, and those ones, their tumors melted away from the fever. So it was like this really powerful immune response to whatever infection they had.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because their immune system was kicked into high gear, it also attacked the tumors and melted them.
Isn't
But
that crazy?
but so then think about what the traditional treatment does is the opposite.
That goes against, yeah.
Down. So, and that whole, I mean, this is years and years ago, and this guy was then they then they talked about a guy who you've heard how couldn't figure out why all the women were dying and when they were having babies, and they finally figured out because they weren't washing their hands in between. Well, like the original guy that figured that out, they like laughed him out of.
Oh, didn't they put him in a crazy home or something?
I didn't know that, and
Yeah.
they said that he was like out on the streets going up to random pregnant women.
Oh no.
He was like, make sure they wash their hands.
Yeah, and they're looking at him like,
He's like, when you go to the doctor, please tell them to wash their hands. And everybody was like, man, you are so crazy.
isn't that something though?
Yes.
That's why you that's why it pays to educate yourself. And
Yeah.
it pays to have like some type of measuring stick against what you're learning, not just because you've learned it over and over. That doesn't mean anything. We all kinds of things get said and people adhere to it because it was tradition or because they were raised that way. That does not mean it's right. So
Yep.
you have to have that little flag in your head that, I mean, it's anything when it comes to anything, but especially medical, your spiritual life, like you got to know what's going on, and have some type of measuring stick to measure something against. It can't just be because that's what was always done.
No, because for a long time we didn't know there were, bacteria. Because we didn't have a microscope. We couldn't see it. We didn't know that, we thought the earth was flat.
All kinds.
There's all kinds, and I can't remember what the name of the effect is, but there's some type of effect to our mind that if we don't believe it, we actually can't see it. I think we've talked about this before too. Like if you don't believe something, your mind will not allow you to visually see it.
So it's such a mind. That's why you got to check yourself.
Yes.
Because it's more than just what you see with your eyes. You got to check yourself. And like I said, have a measuring stick because people can say whatever and, oh, well, my grandma did that so poor guy, he's telling them to wash their hands now. People would look, not washing your hands, just delivering babies. And it was the wealthy women that it was happening to. So they couldn't even blame because they were the ones that were having that kind of care. And they're like, well, what's going on? Why are these babies dying?
Yeah, it was so interesting because it was the medical students that all of the women were dying because they were going in and with the corpses, like rotting corpses. And then we had another group that it was all the midwives, and all they were doing was they were with the women with the babies. They weren't touching all these dead bodies. And so that they were doing better. And they're like, what are they doing differently? Like, what is it about this group? So yeah, crazy, but so important to be able to look at things objectively, like you said, and check your beliefs. And and we're talking about like, what do you believe about yourself, like your identity? So many things we're going to talk about in this workshop are so fascinating. Like there is a guy in there who basically again, fatal, prognosis, not going to make it, weeks to live. In his identity, he just had this like he loathed himself, and he just had no love for himself anywhere. And because he only had a few weeks to live, he allowed himself before, I think he wanted to become ordained as a minister, and he wanted to get married, but because he had such a low self-worth, he
Mhm.
wouldn't he would not allow himself to reach that goal that he wanted. He wouldn't get married. And
Mm.
so they told him he only had weeks to live. So he's like, what the heck? It's like, might as well get married. He met all the qualifications for whatever program to get ordained. So he's like, well, might as well. So
He's like, I'm gonna be a minister.
I'm
And
dying anyway. He completely at all that, they did scans, slowly tumors melting, going away until he's totally cured. And he had the sense of love. He allowed himself to be loved.
that was the missing piece.
Yeah.
Did he marry the white woman, or did he just grab any old body?
No, this was someone that he had, they had, she loved him. She was like, why don't
Oh,
you?
he wouldn't marry her though.
Oh, she's like, why won't you just allow me to love you? And it was because he had such a horrible estimation of himself, which I'm sure went back, which we talk about. Lisa, the other Lissa, the other doctor I told you about from PBS, she talked about it. It's Gabor Mate, all the people that I love, they talk about the trauma. And it doesn't have to be some crazy trauma. It could be generational trauma. It could just be whatever it is. So many of us are just like, well, I had a perfectly normal childhood. And it's like, nobody has a normal childhood.
That sounds good.
No one has a perfectly normal childhood.
Like, no one was a mass murderer.
Right.
I think that they think it has to be so extreme.
Yeah.
And it also can be your personality, your perception of things, the way you deal with things. I always say that it's like the black sheep in the family. Every kid is going, well, what's the problem? We were all raised the same way. Right. Well, that could be a problem. And also, they process some things differently than you did and saw things through a different lens because we are different.
Yeah.
So, and some of them are traumatized too. They just handle it in a different way, or they're not ready. They're in denial.
Oh yeah. And then I love that, like you said, he goes the different pieces. So there's also a huge correlation between antibiotics and breast cancer. Like there's this huge body of research that the amount, like how many times you had them and how the dose even the higher the dose, the stronger the possibility that you would. So they're like, well, why is that? And I'm like, well, what we were talking about before with the fever and with the immune system and how it actually will help to ward off these behaving badly cells. And when you suppress that and when you overuse and overutilize antibiotics, which has been done for years and years and years, you're messing with your own body's innate capacity to keep this stuff at bay, because we've now come to know that we all have this in our body, just like ready to go, but we can keep it at bay, but we're doing stuff to bring it out. So it was just so fascinating. I can't wait to share. And like, I know a lot of people have already said that they bought the book, and you don't have to buy the book if you want to do the workshop. If you haven't, I'm going to have like a little workbook. So if you want to just use the workbook, not everybody wants to read the entire book, but I think the book is a great read anyway, and to have.
How long is it?
For later. It is, 380 pages. It's not that bad.
Oh, okay.
But it's not like super, well, the print is pretty small.
But it's not big. Is it a really big book?
No, it's this big.
Okay. I didn't think it was too
big. Hand. It's not a little book.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting read. Like the thing about it is, yes, he does get into science, and he'll talk about the natural killer cells, and he'll talk about, he'll go in on the immune system, he'll go in on the neurological system, but then he'll throw in a case study, and then you're drawn in. You're like, okay, what happened with this person? Mm-hmm. And then oh man, they died. Like,
No, so he keeps it interesting. I thought of a couple things while you were talking, and one went away, but one was trauma. I was just talking to a friend about this, and she was talking about trauma, how our body holds on to things, and how it can be generationally, and how it can be like DNA wise that can get repeated, which we know. But I hadn't thought of it, and she was talking about slavery. And I was like, I said, I definitely get how that's traumatic. I said, but so many groups of people have been enslaved. I said, does it seem different now because here in this country, blacks were the most recent or whatever? And she said, the difference is that, and also the difference is being taken from your homeland.
yes.
And I had, so thinking of trauma when you say that, so these different things being taken from your home, she said, that's a huge difference, and I thought that's interesting. So trauma, it's huge. It's huge. And so it can be, and something that you don't even know about, but that you're affected by because it's in your DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Because, and like even the people that there were studies that the slavery was happening in Africa, but the people who were brought here, the African American men here, the rate of high blood pressure is through the roof, where it's not in Africa, and they experienced slavery there too. So now we know that the slavery here then transposed into all kinds of other things, and the oppression and all of that for years and years and years. So, but there's a big difference between African Americans here and in Africa, and we call it essential. We don't know, idiopathic. We don't know why they have the high blood pressure, but like you said, generational trauma. It's in the DNA, that trauma. Stress, that it's just like pre-wired.
Yeah, and then the other things count. We know that, but I was just thinking of that trauma piece when you said that, and how and the things that your individual ancestor went through, that is that you're dealing with. Like you don't get a free pass. That's why we try to be good parents and stuff. Your kids are affected by what you do.
Oh yeah. Lisa said, you mentioned suppressing emotion. Does he talk a lot about how to change emotions? So that's a good question about suppressing, and we will learn it's not about changing emotions, right? But it's about allowing them to express and then let them go. But yes, that healing your identity, healing your beliefs, he goes in on placebo. He really talks about the placebo effect. So yes, he does talk a lot about that. So it's going to be really exciting and encouraging, because that whole identity, there's a couple of instances in the book where people just like, if you think about it, our personality and our identity, we create that throughout our life. We're not born with a personality. We might have certain tendencies or whatever, but we pick it up. Oh yeah, this is how I do. We take personality tests or whatever, and it's like we kind of piece that together. And you might have a personality or an identity that has a sickness, and literally, if you drop that identity, you can literally drop that sickness, just like that schizophrenic person with diabetes.
Wow.
Like that.
That's so crazy.
She's like, okay, now,
so crazy.
Now I'm Maggie.
Yeah. Whole different set of symptoms. Isn't that wild?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And just how important the immune system is. Like we always talk about it, that, it's your immune system. And when I had some testing done recently, and she was looking at things and talking about the immune system and how it's like an army and how you have different branches. And I have a few branches that the numbers are up. Not crazy, but they're up. She said, that's enough to hold you back. That's enough to cause, I have this digestive issue that pops up every now and again. And it's been for years, since before I was married, and I'll be married 25 years. The times are getting closer together that it happens though. And I never really connected it. If you asked me if I had digestive problems, I would say no, because I dealt with that so infrequently. But as I get older and it's happening, I'm like, okay, maybe something's going on here too. And she's like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That immune system is so huge. And that's why I always say when people are, this is kind of off subject, but it goes along with what you're saying as far as different areas. When people, eat certain things because everyone's eating it and it's so good for you, but it's inflaming your immune system. And so there's inflammation. It ain't good for you.
Mm-mm.
Doesn't matter what it is. You are sensitive to it, whatever it is. So, that's what that made me think of. I was like, there's something going on that I'm doing. Because she said, you've done a lot of good work. I can tell because you feel good, but this and this and this.
Yeah.
So that immune system is so huge. And then you put trauma in there and, everything goes together.
Yep.
So
and
pretty
one
interesting.
of the quotes he says is, everyone's microbiome is individual as a fingerprint. So our microbiome has to do with, first of all, the passage through the vaginal canal, and then experiences and jobs and what you were exposed to. Like, everybody has such individual. So like you said, there's no one prescriptive, okay, then everybody needs to be on this one probiotic, or everybody needs, it's very individual. Yeah, so it's going to be super exciting. Barb's asking about register and pay. So anybody who's already in my Level Up group, you guys already know anything I ever do is already, you guys, it's just for you guys. Everything in the Level Up, the people, especially the grandfathered in, the people that joined the very first, it's going to be a year in August. Those people, I think so. It was August when we started the group. Those people, like, that's the great thing about being in the group. You just get everything. You just get it all. So it's only people that are not in Level Up that need to get in Level Up for the workshop. And I'll be doing a webinar. I always do a webinar just to help people understand step by step. Okay, here's how you come into the group.
That's always good, Jess, because we don't know. And I'm in there, and half the time I'm like, what are they doing? So, so having the webinar is like important. I love that you do that, because once they're in there, they're in there.
Right. Once you're in there, you just, anything I ever do and teach, you get it. But I will do a webinar Friday at 2, and that way everybody, and I'll make an event, and I'll do that after we get off of here, so you guys will have that.
And you'll put the link here, right? You put the link here too, so people, you guys can share this video, so then people that would be maybe they don't know they're interested, but they need to be interested.
Yeah.
And what she's talking about, because it hits everything. And of course, that backdrop of being cured, obviously, but all those things we need to work on. It's the stuff we talk about all the time. And now you have a much bigger reason to to jump on board. And like he even, I don't know how he says it in the book, but just from reading reviews and stuff, we know that nothing is like 100% guaranteed, but you are better for doing it. It's kind of like when walking around being mad at everybody is not going to help you. I had a friend who had cancer, and she went to get it taken care of naturally. And the doctor said to her, okay, so who are you mad at? You need to let that go. He was very pleased that she had never had chemo. He works with people who had it, but he said it's very hard to get them to cure them. And so, and she worked with them for 2 months, and it was interesting though, that is what he asked her. Yep. And she had been off sugar for like 6 months, and he was like, I'm glad for that. All the things that we talk about. So, and sometimes we get kind of look for one thing. It's not one thing.
Nope. So, different pillars. It's so funny because the pillars are nutrition, healing your immune system, healing your stress response. So that would fall in line with who are you mad at? Like that, are those emotions churning in there? Are you running that cycle of stress, emotions, stress hormones? And then healing your belief and identity. So again, that kind of goes back to, are you that person that doesn't feel like you deserve anything? Maybe you don't deserve to be healthy. And you literally don't know it in a conscious level. It's subconsciously, you're like, I'm not worthy of good health. And so all of those things he talks about. So we will talk about all of the pillars. Lisa, I'm helping a lady with unforgiveness with it's so interesting. And you also asked how do you know you're in the group? You would know if you were in the group, so you must not be. But and I'll help you guys with links and stuff after this. But that's so interesting because I was talking to someone who had a miscarriage, and the way she put it was, she said, I've had one successful pregnancy. So she viewed her miscarriage as a failure. Yeah. She was like, so that was a success, and the miscarriage, I failed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a very common belief. And you have nothing, you cannot control that. So what are you going to do how can you go back and wish something that happened didn't happen? Like it happened.
Mm-hmm.
You're setting yourself up in that situation.
Wow.
So yeah, that would be very helpful for her, Lisa. Maybe she needs to know about this workshop too. She says, you had me at cured. I know, right? That does sound nice. Cured. I think he was smart to make that the title of his book. But years and years and years of research, and starting out as a skeptic and being like, okay, people just keep telling me that I need to look into this. Fine. I've into it. But then even at that, he one part of it was he went to, I don't know if you've ever heard of there was like a 16-minute documentary on him, and in Brazil, he's called John of God. He's like supposed to be this faith healer. And so he went there, and like these people are all, oh, John. And then he said, he started hearing stories about the supposed healer. There were all these stories of wonderful healings, but then he started hearing about women being invited back to see him privately, and he was doing, private treatments on these women.
Yeah,
and it's not funny.
Healing them, all right.
It's not funny. He would, like a sexual assault. So he was so disgusted by that. And he was like, but I have to set that aside and be like, okay, there were some outcomes here. So I have to figure out what the people that had the outcomes, what were they doing? What was what they believed, did, practiced? What were they doing with their health? Like, what are those people doing? Because some people did have these good outcomes. Let's just set this guy aside. Let's put him out of the picture because he's obviously not the reason.
Yeah, because they believed that he healed them, and they had the other pieces in place.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it was just so fascinating that he was like, even at that, he was like, that almost threw him off, where he was just like, you know what?
He was so disgusted. Like,
yeah. He was like, really? And then he was like, no, I said I would take a very scientific look at this. So I'm going to approach it that way. So I'm really excited about it, you guys. I hope that you will love it. I think that you guys will love it. I'll go back through.
We will.
Trauma seems to be a difficult piece in wellness. Oh yeah. Self-blame. Oh yeah. Trauma. Absolutely. But that's universal. It's universal for all of us. So that's why these universal pillars that he talks about, it's so nice, because we're all going to either deal with it or be trying to help people. I feel most women, I'm trying to read it, intuitive enough to tell the doctor what's going on. Yeah.
What she's talking about as far as like feeling like she should be able to pick a more natural path. They say that he kind of talks about how the medical system should work. Does he have a view on that or something, Jess, in the book?
Yeah. He's completely changed his view over the years, based on everything he's learned. And he's just kind of like me. You just really start to see how things should be and how it's going to be. There are fixed beliefs, and then when you peel back the layers, there's reasons for those, and there's ulterior motives and benefits that to be gained by staying in certain beliefs. So you really do have to be educated, like Felicia was saying, because if you just go by what the common belief or the common accepted, you're going to be going along with what most people are seeing is beneficial for the almighty dollar.
Yeah. I got a funny story to tell you. So we did some foot soaks in some fulvic acid. And so Jacoby and my husband, they did theirs. And so they got done, and Jacoby was like looking at the water, and I hadn't said anything much about what could be in the water. So I was over on the other side of the room wanting to kind of like really see, but not freak him out. So he gets done, and he's so curious, which I thought, okay, this is on his own. He's looking, and he was like, why does the water look like that? And I was like, I don't know. Your dad's didn't look like that. He was like, what? I said, I don't know. He's like, why does it look furry? That was the best way he could explain it. I was like, yeah, it kind of. I was like, no, your dad's didn't look like that. So he says, what? And I said, no. I didn't know what else to say. I was just being serious. I'm like, I don't know. And I'm looking, but I don't want to make him nervous. So I'm looking. And then he says I forgot what he used, but he had a plastic knife, because I was like, don't touch none of my silverware. So he had a plastic knife, and he was kind of going through, and nothing would happen. So nothing was there. It was fine. But he looked, I said, we're all different. I said, we're all different. I said, so your dad had whatever he has, and I hadn't done it. And you have whatever you have. So he looked in there, he said, so that's anxiety. That's Jacoby.
Those little furry things were his little anxiety.
Yeah, he was like, so that's anxiety. I thought that was cute. So I thought the connection was that he gets that. I wanted him to understand we're all different.
Right.
We're all different. So you got to figure out what you need. And so that was kind of like, that's Jacoby. That's anxiety.
Yes. We'll talk about naming ourselves too. Giving yourself a name. A little furry. He could be furry. He could be furry. Fuzzy.
Why is it furry? I was like, I don't know. Right. Your dad's didn't look like that.
Here go Fuzzy again. Okay, so we will stick with our half-hour format. I know it's been a little over, but I will get I'll get the event set up and the registration and all that, so that we can start. And I'll go through that post where there were all those hundreds of comments, and I'll make sure and post it there too, because I know all of those hundreds of people aren't watching right now. They need to know about the workshop. Okay, so we'll see you guys then. Felicia and I will see you next week.
Bye.
And that's actually when the workshop will be starting. Yes. Bye, guys. Have a wonderful night.